All right, everyone. If we are all ready to start, I'd ask that we do a Pledge of Allegiance, please. Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and
and justice for all. I would like to call this Finance Committee meeting to order on Tuesday, March 31st. We are using remote technology, but so we will do a formal roll call so I know who from the committee is on the line or participating via video. I will just start with, I don't believe she was able to make it, but Divya. Tim? Tim, I think you're on mute. Tim, I think, did we lose him? I know he's here. We'll go back. I think he might have just disconnected. Thomas?
Yep.
Kevin?
I'm here by telephone only.
Thanks, Kevin. Jen?
I'm
here.
Chris?
Yes, I am here.
Ed McMillan? Ed, you may be on mute because I can't hear you. Let's keep going. Chuck? All right. I know Ed and Tim are both joining. So Tim, are you back?
I am back.
Thank you so much. And Ed, are you with us yet? Well, I do know I spoke to Ed right before the meeting. He is joining. So there is probably just he's on mute or there's a technology complication. So we will go back and confirm that he's on the meeting shortly. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. I really appreciate it given the current circumstances. We are going to hear from first Town Moderator Mark DeSalvo to give us a little bit of additional information regarding the town meeting for 2020 and some kind of things that are happening in the legislature and how that impacts North Andover and potentially our timeline for, the spring in our town. So Mark, I'd love to hand it over to you and let you briefly discuss that.
Thank you all, much appreciated. I want to say particular thanks for the invitation. This is exactly the second time in the 8 years that I've been moderator that I've been invited back to a FinCom meeting. So I thank you for the courtesy. I'm happy to wait another 4 or 5 years between each invitation is just fine by me. My job is to appoint you folks and let you do your work, and I truly appreciate that. You know that I'm very hands-off about that. Second is that we are in these querulous times, and none of us have a crystal ball, but there are some schemes, I use that word in the British sense, and there are some activities that ought to be interesting to you in terms of where we go. First of all, it is the selectman's responsibility, as the town manager will relate to you, to call the town meeting. At that moment, it's the moderator's responsibility for the safe now conduct of a fair, open, and efficient meeting. Never used to have to say safe. That is now the most overriding circumstance that we deal with. At this moment, the law allows a moderator unilaterally, with consultation with the Board of Selectmen and public safety officials, to postpone a meeting at any time prior to its start. There's no need for people to gather, to expose them in this kind of a circumstance, if in fact we're still in the querulous times that we are right now. I've helped over the last several weeks craft, as I told the selectmen back on early March, or mid-March, that we we're working on legislation in concert with the Mass Municipal Association, and that legislation will allow, when passed, it's not yet been engrossed. The anticipation is that it may pass this week, even though the House and Senate are in informal session, to allow two things that are different. Number one, allow the Board of Selectmen to postpone upon a majority vote of the Board of Selectmen a town meeting, in this time in concert with the moderator, and B, that it would allow a moderator and or a Board of Selectmen to continue postponements. The current law only allows a postponement up to 30 days. As to whether we'll have a meeting on May 19th, I've no idea. However, there's enough flexibility in the law that it seems to me to be prudent that we should carry on government just as you are carrying on government right now, with the expectation, or hope at least, that we would have a town meeting on May 19th. And if at any time prior to that, then working cooperatively with the board, we'll make very likely a joint decision, or if in the last moment, a last minute decision, so there's no need to gather 3 people together or 5 people together, to, in the interest of safety, push town meeting to another time. I anticipate conversation with the Board of Selectmen and the town manager to create a protocol about how we collaboratively, like we try to do everything in this community, will make that decision going forward. That's probably the most important thing for you right now. We can talk later, if you'd like, about what the conduct, what the potential schemes of what a town meeting might look like. Would it be dispersed in 3, 4, 5, 17 rooms in the high school? Or could we have, like just happened in Southwick, a town meeting in a parking lot? And Southwick literally had a town meeting in a parking lot. They had a requirement to have a town meeting, or they would lose some significant funding opportunities, and the law hadn't changed in terms of giving them any extension on that. And they gathered this tiny town, I think 135 people, on a local parking lot. And the moderator stood up using a hay bale, quite literally, as a lectern, as a podium, and with a bullhorn conducted a 25-minute town meeting. So there we are. Fun times, folks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. That was helpful. Does anyone have some, I'm sure you have some questions for Mark?
Mark,
I
when
think
would
everyone's
be,
at that meeting.
yeah, Mark, when would be the drop dead time for a decision relative to whether a meeting will be held or not?
The drop dead time is 5 minutes before it begins, quite literally, because it would be in my unilateral authority. We're certainly not going to do that to the community when it's clear that we can't put together a protocol to conduct a safe meeting, never mind fair and open and efficient. Then we'll make that call collaboratively sometime prior to, give lots of notice for people so that nobody is showing up at what they believe might be the scheduled town meeting and putting themselves at risk, never mind other people.
Mark, I have also a question about how far can we push it out? I mean, could it go into July, August, or is there...
The short answer to that is, if the legislation passes, that we're anticipating that will pass, we can go past June 30th. Right now, under the law, there's a requirement for towns to complete their town meetings by June 30th. There's every expectation that we won't have that circumstance. Melissa can address better than I the consequence of not having a town meeting even under our current law, because we do have anticipated legislation and regulation that would allow us to conduct town business on a 1/12 of the prior year budget. But right now, it is anticipated that we'll have the flexibility to be able to push town meeting for as long as is necessary before we actually can conduct it safely. Other
Okay.
queries?
No, I mean, that answered a lot of my questions. Does anyone else have any questions for Mark?
I do.
Mark,
I do.
Mark.
Sorry. Oh,
Yes, Ed. Oh, I'm sorry, Jen.
yeah, sure. Mark, this is Jen Laws. Thank you for taking my question. I'm curious to know, practically speaking, with the timing that it takes for the warrant to go out and all of the moving pieces there, do you have in mind some sort of deadline where you're hoping to make a decision about May 19th? Because I know practically speaking that there's a lot that's built into the schedule. I understand that we're all still working as if that's on, but is there some framework that you and the board are working with in mind right now?
We've not discussed that. We have a lot of flexibility. In truth, once the warrant is set, and I know that you are being asked to contribute some writings, as am I, that will change the tenor of some of that which we write in terms of recommendations to the town and or rules and regs relative to town meeting and my annual moderator's message as well. But I think that we can write to give ourselves the maximum flexibility so that we can make that judgment the shortest appropriate time prior to the actual scheduled meeting, if it in fact gets scheduled for May 19th, which in truth is my recommendation that we do so, but the board has the unilateral authority to determine the initial call of the town meeting date.
I got a quick question for you, Mark.
Yes, Chris.
Like, of course, what we're doing now is we're putting together, our portions of the warrant, like our summaries of all the things that we want to talk about and all that. And basically we're moving forward as if we're having town meeting. Our issues now is that because of the situation with the town, we know that things are in flux. Things are going to change. Things are going to change probably quite a bit, even if we held town meeting at the regularly scheduled town meeting. And my question is that would it be possible to change what we have written to put into the warrant before the actual meeting, if it's in May or if it gets postponed later? Things are changing so dramatically that we're inclined to say, like, we have no recommendation. We can't approve or disapprove
Yes.
for many, many, many different things. So it would be nice that if there was something concrete before town meeting, we could say, hey, this is the situation. We have to change things. What's our latitude for changing verbiage that is handed out to people, actually physically put in their laps before we're on stage?
I think that the latitude is actually quite significant. We have the wonderful flexibility of electronic communication, the ability to be able to put a document up even hours before, as sometimes happens.
Yes.
That is different than what a prior recommendation might have been several weeks before, when you were asked to publish, as an example.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot of flexibility. The intent is to give the public as much appropriate warning, and there is a responsibility under law to post a warrant in a particular period. I think it's 14 days prior to, but it doesn't mean that warrant has to have the exact language and or a single recommendation in it. It's entirely appropriate, not advised, but entirely appropriate if under the circumstance you make a judgment where there isn't enough clarity for you to be able to say a recommendation will be made at town meeting. Just as quite often those of you who have served, I think two of you have served on the planning board, that the planning board often does.
Okay.
So just to follow up on that and be clear, we have the ability to put out additional statements electronically at any time. However, there is a process with a written warrant. The administration in the town needs ample time to prepare that, to get it to print, and then to have that disseminated in a certain fashion by law. So I think we also need to be cognizant of that from that our physical document is most likely never, you correct me if I'm wrong, and Melissa also, please, we have town manager Rodriguez on the phone, please also chime in. You know, we should anticipate that once that document goes to print, it will not be reprinted.
I'll allow Melissa to chime in first.
Sure. So we certainly wouldn't reprint it. What I have seen in the past is that we would have an addendum that we would have the handout at town meeting and that we would make available in public places beforehand. I have seen many times warrant articles go forward without a recommendation or a report attached to them because the planning board had not yet done their public hearing before it went to print, or the finance committee was waiting for additional information, for instance, construction costs, et cetera, that were not yet available, and we would give that out in handout.
Let's remember something. Let's remember something about the nature of the warrant. The warrant is not gospel. It is simply a warning to the community that this item is going to be discussed, and that the only other specific to it is that once that is published, then we as a meeting can only discuss something that's under scope, that's within the four corners, if you will, of that article. So a motion, even though circumstances might change, that might afford something that is very clearly beyond the warning that a fair-minded person wouldn't have otherwise been aware that they should come to town meeting to speak for or against, or vote for or against any particular item. So we need to be careful about that. But that happens in the course of every town meeting in any case. In terms of your obligations as a finance committee, you have a lot of flexibility, as the town manager stated very, very clearly. You can default to we're not making a recommendation until town meeting, because that's the prudent thing for you to do in terms of your obligation to represent to the community what your recommendation might be. Your considered recommendation.
Just one more comment on that, Mark. I mean, given that it's likely that obviously things will change before town meeting, whether it's scheduled or postponed, perhaps in your statement about the warrant, you might put maybe a line or two, something additional in there saying, because of the extreme or unusual circumstances, it is likely that some of this information might change, or it's possible that this information might change. And the reason I say that is because, you know, most people, they come and they have a written piece in front of them, and we've seen town meetings where what they have in their hand is different from what's on the screen. They're upset, they're annoyed, they don't understand, last minute changes. What are you doing? What are you doing behind the scenes that I don't know about? There's all that transparency issue that goes forward. So it's just a thought that perhaps we might communicate more clearly and earlier that the warrant is likely to be different than what they see on the screen, or it is extremely possible it will be different than what is seen on the screen. I don't know. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Wholly fair point. I've done a draft already of my annual moderator's message. It touches that. I can certainly make it much more clear, and I'd equally encourage you as a finance committee in your message to the community to do exactly the same.
That's fair. A fair point. Yes. And well taken. Yes.
Any advice for me if there are no other questions?
I don't have any. Anyone in the group would like to interject at all?
Shave by the weekend?
It's already been determined that I'm not allowed to shave under Sasha's law until town meeting convenes.
That's how long we know how long it gets delayed, right? That'll be a clear indicator.
Practice
Upon
standing on
arrival.
hay bales.
I'm sorry, Tim?
Practice standing on hay bales.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually interesting. We are reflecting. I'm the co-chair of this organization called the 2040 committee to determine what town meeting will look like in 2040. We're thinking of changing the name to the 2021 committee, because one of the things that we've been talking about is the opportunity to have virtual meetings, very much like this. State law does not allow it. You know that we've experimented in our community with remote participation. We will absolutely welcome that in this circumstance. We can't allow remote voting, at least in an open town meeting. In fact, we're discussing the prospect of remote voting in representative town meetings, because as you know, the 100 people, just to pick a number, of town meeting members who are elected are clearly identifiable, unlike the circumstance of as many as 3,000 people showing up to a town meeting. I did a calculation. I created a little applet, actually. Plug in the number of people that you need, that you expect to attend a meeting, call it town meeting. How much space would you need in order to conduct the proper 6-foot radius of support? And I calculated, just for fun, if our cannabis meeting were held in today's time, we would have to hold it in a 7-acre field.
Oh goodness, that's
Yeah.
I'm grateful that we are not considering a 7-acre field, or maybe we are, but
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we have something that requires that. One of
Right.
the other considerations is that we might choose to have a mini town meeting, a town meeting that only covers those things that are absolutely critical for us, and then postpone action on the remainder of the warrant. So maybe cover the budget and capital and the all the finance articles and any other thing that might be critical in the short term, particularly if the Board of Selectmen and the manager suggest that we shouldn't appropriately operate on the current year's 1/12 budget, as an example. But
Right.
those are judgments that are above my pay grade right now, but we can in fact choose to do that. So there's a significant amount of flexibility, and you should be comforted that you have a moderator who's very willing to play the dynamics of the time and be flexible as well.
Well, I agree. And thank you, Mark, for coming. We really appreciate it. Any last questions before we move to our next item on the agenda?
I will sign off, but please know that I'll be listening. And if you want to send me a text or a phone call and would like me to sign back on, should you have any queries, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Mark. We really,
I remember the meeting here. I don't know. Can you see who's sitting on my lap here? I'm sorry.
Let's see. It's not your mother.
No, it's not. This is my cat. My cat has joined the meeting.
Hello, Kitty.
There's nothing I can do about it. All right, that's it. Take care, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Good job,
Thank you,
everybody.
Mark. We appreciate
Thanks
it.
Thanks for powering through. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. All right. So our next item on the agenda is a discussion with Town Manager Rodriguez and Finance Director Savage regarding the potential impacts to North Andover, kind of due to our current times into COVID-19. So how is this potentially going to impact us? Before we start that, I just want to note it for the record that Ed McMillan is present in our meeting, and he was previously. I just did not see his message. So please note that for the record, that Ed is with us today. I'm not sure, is Melissa, are you on the phone, or were you able to call in back?
I'm on the phone. I just can't be on the phone and on the computer because I was getting feedback. I apologize. But I'm still here.
No problem. No problem at all. Thank you. I just wanted to, before we kind of jumped in, wanted to make sure. So, thank you, Melissa and Lynn, for coming. We really, really appreciate it. I think that it would be helpful if Melissa, you wanted to follow up any comments, kind of following up Mark's discussion. If there's anything in particular you think we should hear from you regarding town meeting or anything like that, we're happy to have that conversation first. and then kind of move into potentially your views and Lynn's views on how COVID-19 may impact our community, from a financial perspective and any other perspective you think is relevant, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, sure. So as far as town meeting goes, we are watching the legislation very closely. Unfortunately, has not gotten to the point yet where there seems to be consensus between the House and the Senate. However, the major items for us are the ability to have revolving accounts continue, the ability to have our free cash not have to be recertified and be able to use that free cash into the next fiscal year if town meeting got moved past June 30th, and the one self-budgeting. The one self-budgeting is not ideal, obviously, since it's working and operating off of last year's budget or this year's budget. So obviously, union contracts, fixed costs that we know are increasing would be problemsome if we had to go to that one self-budget. So I'm hoping that that's not going to be what's going to happen. One of the things that a lot of the managers and mayors are talking about is how do you get your budget passed? So do you just have this smaller town meeting where you do the essential items like Mark was saying, and then go to a fall meeting for anything that's not where time is not of the essence. So that's really the focus has been right now. So we've been having a lot of meetings with the Managers Association and the Mayor's Association, and just talking through these issues and trying to get our comments through to the legislators, and we hope to see this moving forward over the next week or so.
Okay.
As far as the budget for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 and the impacts from COVID-19, Lynn and I have talked about this, and I've also been having these conversations with some colleagues across the state on whether or not we think we're going to see major impacts. I actually think that in a lot of ways we are lucky because the majority of our budget, right, about 77%, are made up of taxes. So if you have a community that's really relying a lot more on other types of fees and fines, they may be more impacted. But because our budget revenue is really made up of taxes and local aid, I don't think we'll have a big impact at all. I will say that, interestingly enough, our building permit fees during this time period have been actually quite good, higher than I think we anticipated. Some people seem to be actually doing work because they're at home. And so surprising, but not terrible news for us. And so we're not really seeing any financial impacts to the town at this point. The only way I think we would moving forward would be if we started to see foreclosures, but I don't think we'd see those foreclosures until fiscal year 22. So I'm not concerned about revenues for the rest of this fiscal year or for fiscal year 21. I think both of our enterprise funds for water and sewer will be fine. Actually, water and sewer could be higher than usual because more people are home. And the only thing that could be negatively affected would be the Stevens Estate because they have had to cancel some of their events. Lynn, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think, Melissa, you've covered most of it. I mean, and I ran the revenue numbers based on what we've got posted through today, and the revenues are, I mean, it's we're of course going to have some timing issues on the motor vehicle excise and the real estate, but it's going to come in. They're taxes, they have to be paid. Plus we have, of course, a skeleton crew in the offices periodically that are coming in, picking up work, doing the entering from home, and we're shuffling the work between us all to get it all posted. So it's a timing thing right now. That's all it is, because right now the revenue through the end of March is right on target with the same period of time last year. We're actually exceeding revenues in some of the categories. So I don't really see any major issues whatsoever, and even moving into 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would ask, do you and you guys are way heavier pulse on kind of legislation, more so than myself. So would you anticipate there being any legislation that would be impactful, anything that would trickle down from the federal or state government that would require us to provide relief or some kind of extension that we wouldn't otherwise provide on property taxes or other kind of fees?
We talked about that a little bit on one of our calls this week. and none of us are hearing that at all. I think that there's a pretty solid understanding, especially on our state level, of how municipal government works, since both Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito have worked in municipal government and are really familiar with it, as well as a lot of their cabinets. And they really do understand the way our revenues work. And so they are very cognizant of what the impacts of a delay even would be for us. So I do not anticipate seeing that come forward.
Okay. That's helpful.
We're seeing a lot of people paying online, putting bills in the drop box outside and mailing their mail. And so even though we're not physically in the office, people are still coming in, getting those checks. We're still processing everything. It's slower than usual, but work is still happening behind the scenes.
Are you guys doing anything proactive? I mean, I know it's probably a little preemptive for this, but if, as this continues, are you guys doing anything proactively to reach out to anyone who is delayed in paying their taxes, or is that something that we would ever put in place? So, there's a home with typically very good history. Would we ever proactively reach out to someone like that, or would we just, assess a fee and do what we usually do? Is there a kind of a procedural change, or no?
So we've been talking about what we can do for people who are paying late, and under the law, the treasurer only has certain things that they can do, and it's only a certain amount of interest. And so if we do start seeing the next tax bill goes out, next week, Lynn?
Yes, they've actually already gone out, and they'll be due May 1st.
May 1st. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on those as they're coming in, but I anticipate that, yes, we'll be working with people on their late fees and kind of trying to give a little bit more of a grace period than we typically would, and be doing some outreach.
Okay.
Melissa or Sasha, it's Thomas. I really have a hard time to believe that there will be not a significant impact on our revenue in the next 9 months. I mean, just the numbers are mind-boggling. And following, Goldman Sachs talking about a 35% contraction in Q2, and a lot of these experts saying we might not see a quick rebound in Q3 and Q4. We're talking probably a recession with 5 to 10% contraction this year. And also how we are moving into that recession is very different than previously, or ever I've seen a recession. Yes, the previous recessions is where, some spending get, reduced, some people get laid off, but we have this massive unemployment coming. I mean, that has not, the 3 million new unemployed people, this is not the end. Numbers are that it's going to exceed 10-15% of unemployment. Plus, people running out of cash. If there's no income, I mean, we see in our restaurants or entertainment, anybody who works there just doesn't have the money to pay the next bill and rent, mortgage, and whatsoever. That we might have a different structure in North Andover, that it might not hit as hard as somewhere else, maybe, but that there is no significant impact, that is very, very difficult for me to understand, really. So I would need to have a little bit more education around that, why this is such a small impact only on our revenue.
So again, I don't think we'll see the impact until at least fiscal year 22. If we had a recession, the impact of that recession, particularly on property values, is about 18 months later. So if we entered a recession, it was going to impact our largest revenue base, which would be our property taxes and other taxes. We really wouldn't see the impact of that recession for 18 months.
Yeah, and again, I'm not an expert. This recession is very different. This recession is that suddenly millions of people are out of a job, or people actually having a job not getting paid. And, nobody has a cushion to pay the bills for the next 3 months, or most people don't. If they don't get paid on a monthly basis, they cannot pay their bills. I cannot understand why we don't will that we unless the banks are more reluctant or flexible by not collecting on the mortgage. You know, we should see that some money is not coming in, and I don't know if the property tax will be paid. The Q2 property tax will be paid 100%. I mean, with what's
So right
going
now we see about
on, I could see that Q2 property tax, or are we in Q3? I never really know. It's always a little bit off. That people just won't be able to pay it. And
Lynn, right now we see about a 90% collection rate on property tax, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay.
was pre-corona. We're right now in the
Right, no,
midst.
I understand that. That's actually quite high for a community to have a 90% collection rate. Additionally, I think, as you all know, we tend to budget rather conservatively, even this year in a year where we push harder than we typically would push on our revenues. So even then, I still am comfortable with where the revenues are. If we were going to make cuts to the budget, which at this point I would not recommend, because we're just not seeing that for fiscal year 21 at this point. The places that I would recommend cutting would be two places. One, from the reserve, obviously, or two, I could do an analysis with Lynn of what operating capital we have, and then we could shift that operating capital over to free cash as a revenue source instead of the tax levy, if we were concerned about that. That's something that easily could be done with a motion at town meeting. That would be well within the four corners of the warrant article. All it would be a change of revenue source rather than not a change to the budget. And so as things move forward, if we started to see that taxes weren't being paid, which we would be able to tell because we've got a quarter coming forward due before town meeting, or two, that other revenues start to like they're down and not where we think they're supposed to be, those are two things that we could look at doing. At this point, I'm not seeing it, but of course, we'll continue to watch it, and those would be my recommendations.
And I concur with that.
And I'm also good with that, because I don't know what is happening in next month. I don't even know what's happening next week. I'm a business owner. I have really no clue what's happening tomorrow in that situation. Right. I understand nobody can point that out, but I would like to see that scenario, planning. What if we're short 5 million? What if we're short 10 million? What can we do short term, quickly? How much, flexibility do we have if worst case is happening? And if it's just an exercise at the end of a day, but that we show, yeah, we thought about it. We thought about, we're hoping for the best, but are planning for the worst. And we can go so far without really doing stupid things. And if the sky is really falling, well, then we have to prove anyway in a completely different way. But to say there is no impact and we just let the budget fly, I have a hard time.
Well, I think what Melissa is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that's not going to happen. It's that what we know today, and again, Melissa, please correct me if I'm wrong, but as it stands today, this is what you're seeing. It may change before town meeting, in which case, it's well within your ability and our ability to recommend a change to what's on the warrant, right? To do these things that you just mentioned, which would allow us to have kind of a safety net, for lack of a better word, if we saw on May 5th that we weren't receiving, close to a 90% collection rate. Is that fair? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, that we have two plans at this point of things we could do in order to take some of the revenues down if necessary, and that we will continue to analyze those as we go to a town meeting.
Does anyone have some additional comments, questions? Tim?
I was just thinking about other parts of not just the revenue, but by passing a budget, a school budget in particular, where we're committing to hire 11 people, what's the go, no go on something like that? I mean, Melissa, would you suggest if this virus continues for more months, which no one really knows, would you go forward still with hiring people? Or would you say put that on pause?
So right now, we're not really onboarding any new employees. If we had essential positions that we needed to fill, for instance, if we had a firefighter, police officer position, because obviously in DPW, those are essential workers that are reporting to work and that we obviously need right now more than anyone else. Those we're filling. Other than that, we are not filling positions. Would we still budget them? Likely, because eventually they are going to go back to school. We hope. I hope, God. And we are going to need those positions. Those needs have not changed. But right now, we are not onboarding positions, which is a good thing in this environment as well, because that means that we have excess revenue in the departments where we have vacancies. So we do have a built-in cushion because of that, which we would not typically have.
So would you work with Greg Gilligan, our superintendent, to come up with a plan about, again, the go, no go on hiring people? Because as the summer comes, you need to bring these people on board or not.
Yeah, so we're working together every day on the planning parts of this. And kind of this is certainly uncharted territory, right, for every community, and trying to figure out the long-term planning and how to be proactive versus reactive is so important right now. And so, yes, we would work together on what was of an essence at this point. For instance, he may want to move forward pretty immediately on the school nurse, and that actually might be a wise thing, right? But he probably would not want to fill maybe some of the paraprofessional type positions right away.
On a related topic of school, are you seeing anything like out of the ordinary relative to school expenditures going on right now, relative to kids being out of school, down, up, sideways?
So we're paying everyone their regular salary, and as you know, most of our budgets, about 80 to 85% of the county and the school's budget, are people-based, right? So we're not seeing huge decreases by any means. The most impactful thing that's probably happening is the food service. And obviously because we're feeding, we've fed about 1,000 people as of Thursday. I haven't seen updated numbers as of today yet, but that number seems to be only increasing more than anything else. And so we may have more than typical expenses on that food side. Other than that, things seem to be running really right where they should be.
What about the other top parts of the town? I mean, are we incurring more costs because of having to feed, for example, more seniors, or is it? I just got curious if you see any kind of abnormal things. I know you said revenue's fine, but what about the expense side?
No, I mean, things are where they typically would be. We have everybody still reporting to work, so that's like a typical cost for us. We're still running our transportation for seniors like we typically would run our transportation. We're running a food bank, but we're running the food bank with our employees and staff. The COVID-19 hotline is being run with regular employees. We're not getting any overtime hours from any of the operations or emergency operations that we've had to do other than our typical overtime at police and fire and DPW. So no, I'm not seeing any expenses that are unusual. Lynn, I don't know if you've seen anything come through, but on my end, I mean, maybe, for instance, one thing that we wouldn't typically do, but today we had DPW deep clean and sanitize, as well as all of the vehicles. So we'll have a bill for that. That would be outside of our typical cleaning bill. And that person's going to be coming back to do it again, kind of on a cyclical basis in order to keep the employees healthy and safe, obviously. Same thing with, we're using electrostatic guns at the police department, so we're buying supplies for those. We ordered more Lysol wipes than we typically would order through DPW and the health department. We bought a lot of thermometers, that kind of thing, but certainly not anything that's going to be hugely impactful on the budget.
Right, and we do have a couple things. We have a grant that the health department got to help purchase supplies, as well as FEMA has notified us, and we're tracking all of our expenditures so that if it gets to a certain point that we can submit for reimbursement through them. Every community is, because of it's been declared a disaster.
Do we know what those?
Right, and because
Sorry for the interrupt. Do we know what that threshold is yet? Have they put that guidance out?
I have not
they
seen.
haven't told us, right? Yeah, they haven't told us. And because we declared a local state of emergency, we actually could deficit spend, but I don't think we'll have a need for that.
I don't see that there'd be a need for that at all, based on how we budget and the way everybody runs their budgets. I don't foresee that happening.
Me either.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional questions? I know a couple of you just came off mute. Were you looking to?
I had a quick question for Melissa.
This is Ed.
Yeah, hi, it's Ed. One of the drivers of cost, I guess, would probably be overtime, and overtime would be related to more ambulance calls, more people getting sick. If people get sick, our first responders can get sick, which puts people out. So that's something that could get out of hand. Another thing is, what about other communities? I know sometimes we surge and we help other communities in need, and vice versa if we have a need. So that's a potential, and that probably is coming up the next 2 or 3 weeks when this thing really, the curve starts to climb here in Massachusetts. Is that something that we plan for? Is that, I know you're probably doing some training now. And the other question I had was, what about personal protective equipment? Do our firefighters and police have access to type of equipment that will keep them safe if they're responding to multiple calls?
Hi, so as far as overtime, we are tracking overtime for both police and fire. We already anticipated that we would need transfers due to some injuries that we had in fire throughout the entire year. So we've been watching that and planning for that all along. Police is in a similar position. So those were expected deficits that we will be dealing with. Fire is running in kind of a unique position right now where they're not allowing overtime within the 2 houses. So you can't, if you're in fire station 1, you can't do overtime in fire station 2. It's a safety mechanism to make sure that we're not, if someone is exposed, they're not spreading the illness to both departments, because obviously that could be problematic. We're working with Lawrence General on protocols for response. And so we have protocols set for when you need PPE, when you're going into a call, and when you do not. And that's been kind of very clearly laid out by our docs that we work with at Lawrence General. We are going through a lot of PPE equipment, as you can imagine. Everybody at the fire department was fit tested for N95 masks and is using them. We've actually been really, really lucky and blessed by the number of donations we've received from the town. So businesses, nail salons, residents, dentist's office have been just, even the trash wheel operator have been dropping off masks and gloves every day and gowns. And we're actually a collection point for Lawrence General's donations as well at the Chickering Fire Station. So we've been really lucky, and right now we're doing okay with equipment, and we do have enough PPEs for everyone. So that's a really positive thing.
Great, thank you.
Melissa, would we be in a position to help out, let's say, Lawrence Hospital in case they get run over? I'm hoping that's not happening, but right now I don't know anything what can happen with that virus. I mean, I've just looked at pictures in Italy or France and Spain now, how quickly that can happen. Would we be in a position to help out by opening the schools for, are there any scenarios North Andover would help out in case there's a a major need.
So we're working very closely with Lawrence General. We've had planning meetings with them actually right when the illness started up a few months ago. We met with them. They have emergency plans in place. They have COOP planning, continuity planning in place where they have partners in all of our communities that they would use their buildings or tents. And so they have all of that planning in place, which is great. I believe that one of the sites that they use North Andover is actually Merrimack College, which makes sense. They have a lot of large spaces that are available. But we do work very closely with them. There's a lot of communication that goes back and forth. Obviously, our ambulances transport a lot there, so they're kind of a constant information conduit. But yes, we've been meeting with them, talking about emergency planning, figuring out what next steps we would have to take as the peak comes, which, you know, if you're watching the news and talking to DPH in our calls, looks like it's around the April 9th point.
And also, if there's a, I mean, we have infected cases here in North Andover. Is the town in any way involved in finding out, tracking back who they might have been in contact and help out to, you know, isolate potential people in contact of infected, or is that completely outside of town authority to do?
No, so that's our health department. We have 25 positive cases right now in North Andover and numerous other people that we're currently tracking. So what happens is that when we get a positive case, the public health nurse is called, and DPH works on, at the state level, works on tracking the contacts. Those contacts are then given to the public health nurse here in North Andover. She is the one who calls all of those people to let them know that they are potential contacts. And then that person actually goes into their quarantine and contacts our public health nurse every day to report back on their temperature and symptoms over the 2-week quarantine period. So she works not only with people who are positive, which currently is the 25 people, of that 25, 2 are in recovery, but she also works with people who are potentially have contact and on managing them, making sure that they don't have symptoms, and then releasing them when their quarantine period is over. We only have one public health nurse, and she's been amazing, and the school nurses have all stepped up to help her. So many of the school nurses have been trained. Other of the school nurses are actually monitoring the COVID-19 hotline for people who call and have medical questions or questions about the disease that, you know, I can't answer or Lynn can't answer. And so it's been a real collaboration, but Caroline in the health department has been a real hero through all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was chatting and I was on mute. So thank you. That was really helpful. Does anyone have any follow-up questions? I know we as a committee had some discussion about this last week. That's why we asked Melissa and Lynn to be here to give us some more clarity. Anyone feel like they have a little bit more to ask before we kind of wrap it up? And I have some questions as well. Thomas, did you? I didn't know if you went off mute because you wanted to speak. No. Okay.
No questions.
Okay. So that, I think, you know, it was really helpful to hear from both of you, Lynn and Melissa, and I really appreciate it. I think what would be helpful for me is to understand, you know, we have typically a 90% collection rate. We typically budget conservatively. So I guess it might be helpful to see how conservatively we budget, right? And I know we have that. So I think as a committee, you know, we can look at that, and also Lynn, obviously as well, to see kind of what is that variance, right? What do we expect, and how conservatively did we budget this year? And then again, to just keep in touch with Melissa and Lynn regarding next steps. So, you know, what happens after May 1st? When will you have a good pulse, Lynn, you think, on, you know, how we're doing in terms of tax collections in May?
Okay, so the tax bills are due May 1st. So I would give it the first of May. I should be able to determine, you know, because a lot of it comes in because everybody wants to pay on time. I'd at least need a week to see if, what rate of collections we got on this quarter's taxes due.
Okay.
And we'll get a feel from how many calls we get, whether they say they'd like, they're gonna push it out. What are they gonna get charged for fees? Are we waiving any fees? Things like that, so.
So
I
we'll
would
maybe
say-
have some,
Yeah,
have some, initial understanding even before those are due potentially, depending on what phone calls
Correct.
you receive.
yeah, and
And is there,
we're getting payments now already for the first quarter bills that aren't even due yet, so.
well, wouldn't it also, be safe to say, depending on how your bank, if you have a mortgage, how it's escrowed, you're covered for that payment.
Correct, and we
Anyway,
have
at
a
this
lot of them
point,
that are
right?
like that.
So it may not be until the next quarter that we may see that concern if there was some forbearance or, some lenders were providing relief for a few months during this crisis, and potentially it would be more challenging. Could you see that happening in arrears where we're okay for this May 1st
It could
payment and
potentially
then,
do that.
okay,
And I would
All
say
right.
which would be the first quarter of the fiscal year 2021, which could be slowed down. Yep.
okay. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. That was those were some of my questions, and I think our takeaways to look at. I would love, if you don't mind, Lynn and Melissa, to just stay on a bit longer. I'm gonna technically transition to public comment. We did receive, we provided my email address for folks who want to ask questions. So I did receive an email question. There's 3 parts to it. I'm gonna read it out loud, and I think the first couple pieces, Lynn or Melissa may want to address, and we've already potentially addressed, right? Because they're not potentially, this was sent before we discussed it, and then the last one I will. So these questions are from Thomas Dugan. Number 1, what are the current balances of all the various reserve accounts maintained by the town, including all capital related reserve accounts? Number 2, what is currently our most at-risk revenues related to the crisis? Number 3, how will the Finance Committee lead a discussion with town members to first educate and evaluate the changes that the COVID-19 crisis may bring to the FY20 and FY21 budgets? Specifically, how will you engage in remote or in-person, if allowed, with town residents on the trade-offs and decisions associated with the level of services that we can expect? So I think we'll start with number 1, that was regarding the current balances of all the various reserve accounts. Lynn, I would assume those are not something that you have on the top of, at your fingertips. So we could just probably get those balances and post them with the meeting documents. Would that be appropriate?
Yes, I can do that. If in the budget book, you have the beginning of the year balances. So those would be the start. It would have had interest and things added plus whatever was transferred in this year based on last year's town meeting. But I'll get that to you and we can get it posted.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Number 2, what is currently our most at-risk revenues related to the crisis? So I think, you guys could say it again, but we spoke to that at length regarding Texas, correct? Would that be?
Yes, because it would
fair?
be, they will eventually get collected. It's just going to be a timing issue. They're required by law to pay one way or another. So again, it's timing.
Okay. Number 3, how will the Finance Committee lead a discussion with town members to first educate and evaluate the changes that the COVID-19 crisis may bring to the FY20 and FY21 budget? So it's 2 parts. So I'm going to answer that first and specifically say that, one of the ways we're doing this is holding a meeting that wasn't originally scheduled in order to bring in, our town's experts, the town manager and the finance director, to have this conversation and, answer our questions. So that was, I think, the first step. And then I think the second step is we're all pretty cognizant of what we should be watching out for and the communication we need to have, and to understand, a pretty rapidly evolving situation. And then specifically, how will you engage in remote or in-person with, if allowed, with town residents on the trade-offs and decisions associated with the levels of service that we can expect? Well, first, I don't know that at this time any of us would feel comfortable with any in-person events or meetings, but we certainly can have that discussion internally And we may not need to have a in-depth discussion if we don't feel like there's significant trade-offs that are going to have to be made. And we are obviously always available for questions or further discussions from anyone who has them. So if anyone else on the committee wants to interject on that last question, please feel free to do so, or wants to add anything, feel free. Okay. And just so everyone who's listening on the phone, we typically all mute our video and our phone so that there's no static or feedback. So sometimes you'll hear long pauses, and it's purely because I'm giving everyone the opportunity to unmute if they would like to comment, just as a discussion point. So I think that is the only group of questions that I received. Just going to double check before we close public comment. Okay. All right, Lane and Melissa, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I think we're just going to move on to old business and adjourn the meeting, have some discussion. So feel free to stay on, or if you'd like to hang up and enjoy your evening, feel free to do that as well. But we're going to move to the next piece. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye. So let's move on to old business. In terms of the warrant letter, my recommendation is to continue to move forward, quote, kind of business as usual, because our timeline has not yet changed. And so that doesn't mean that doesn't change what we write in our letter. It just means that our letter needs to meet the current deadlines. I would love to have a broad discussion right now about how you guys feel after, hearing this conversation and how you'd like to approach it. I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you guys first, and then we can go from there, because I'd really love for everyone's first draft sections to be completed, pretty quickly. I think originally I had said April 1st. Obviously, that's not possible given the questions that we have now, but perhaps by Saturday night or something like that, so we can have a few days to put it together before our next meeting would be really helpful.
Sasha, I just want to reiterate what I was talking about with Mark, and I just think that for whatever we write about our current situation now, and the end paragraph, whatever, is the caveat that saying, these numbers, these statements, these assumptions are made before, all information has been gathered, or before we even know what's going to happen in these uncertain times. I mean, whatever we have as a standard closing for all of our summaries, for the schools, or for, any of the accounts that we talk about, what I'm saying. I just think that has to be clear. Those things have to be written. My fear is always that people just have something in their hands, and like I say, what's on the screen, and they're different. And so and I would, sorry, didn't mean to, but I would agree with that. And we also have an executive summary page that we do, that we can also make sure to very clearly summarize our thoughts, and we can figure that out and finish that, I think, on Wednesday, after we have all those data pieces and sections kind of completed, right? So then we have something that follows what we currently know to be the operating budget or the capital improvement plan, without this piece. And then everyone can add to their specific section how, if they want to, about how it would be impactful or not, whatever we feel comfortable with. And then there'd be, some much bigger statement, both in the executive summary and reiterating again at the end that this is subject to change, that at this point there's a lot of things that we cannot predict. We anticipate, whatever it is, and we can have this conversation now or table it for April 8th as well, but, that potentially we're not going to make a formal recommendation until town meeting because of the unexpected on certain items, and that can be accurately reflected in our letter. Yeah, that sounds prudent. And also, if we want to reflect, like a lot of what Thomas said is really valid, and it expresses a lot of the fears I think that a lot of people have, that, these are very difficult times. There's a lot of unknowns. But on the other hand, it's also very reassuring to hear about how the town has handled finances in the past. I mean, we all know that, how conservatively they budget, and that the financial impact of this, while there might be a financial impact, as a matter of fact, I think we can sort of assume that there is going to be some sort of financial impact. We just don't know where or how, but that it's not going to be for this fiscal year. It's going to happen most likely for next. I mean, it's going to happen, but it's pushed out a little bit, and we have more time to plan. We continue on our conservative path. I guess I'm thinking this is to be put into the executive summary that you have, that, you know, what we're talking about is not going to dramatically change what is going to go forward in the next year. That would probably be in another 18 months. I don't know how you would want to express it. You know what I'm saying? Like, so people aren't freaking out, like saying schools are going to close next year because we won't have enough money. That's not going to happen.
Well, I think we should, you know, outline and maybe be vague about when we don't know when the impact will be, but outline the ways in which the community, you know, the town manager's safeguards have put in place, right? So
Yes.
here is what the budget looks like. We're not voting, or maybe we are. We have to have that conversation until we have more information. However, here are some of the things that we anticipate everyone evaluating you know, before the budget is voted on formally.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we
don't,
can actually just go right back to the tape, to the words that she actually spoke in our meeting, and say, this is from our town manager. This is what she says. And, you know, a paragraph about something that's not just quite so doom and gloom. I'm just trying to be optimistic.
Chris?
there's a couple people.
I just want to comment on something that Chris said, that also Melissa said, that comes to heart. Maybe we don't see anything revenue-wise hitting until 2022. But I got a problem in the sense that you're going out and hiring all these people.
Yeah.
And, oh, you're good, but then we're going to have to let them all go in 2022? Is that
No,
true?
I totally agree with you. And those are conversations that she says that's between her and the superintendent of schools. That I am not suggesting that we tell people we're just going to continue with this budget and people are going to be hired. That really is not what I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of, like, this money is set aside to the school in this amount. You know, perhaps the assumptions on how that money is spent will change. It's not as if we have a limited amount of power as to what we can do with how the schools spend their money. I grant you that. However, we do rely on the good relationship that we have between our town manager and our superintendent, which we have seen going forward. There's no reason to expect we're going to have that sort of unreasonableness, because you are absolutely correct, Tim. If we don't want to hire people that we have to fire immediately thereafter, we don't want to hire people that we cannot continue to afford.
Nor do we want to endorse just at this point, right, a 5-year strategic plan that requires a 4.5% increase year over year for 5 years, right? I think that plays into it. And so I feel that's kind of how I felt as well, Tim. You know, we have to be really thoughtful, although we all want the schools to get more and be able to. And I think our committee of all, you know, we've tried to be incredible supporters of the schools and them getting appropriate funding. We also need to be cognizant of our current situation and the people involved, right? Their actual, you know, employees involved. So how do we have some reassurance that if we are not, as Melissa stated, hiring at this point, you're only filling essential positions, you know, what is their criteria in which that changes, and how is that distinction made? If we were to move forward with those, you know, approving those 11 hires as part of the budget. And then, you know, we really need to write, I think, in the school section, which I'm sure you would anyway, that, you know, we need to be really cognizant of how this impacts future years, and that we may not be able to expect this.
Agreed.
And you know, so many things go through my mind right now. I don't even know where to start. And you know, it's certainly not helpful that we have to get this done in the next 10 days, right? Or what is it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, to stay within the timeline. What is it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
It needs to be completed and on, you know, Lori's desk by April 10th.
All right, so we have 2 days. So it's certainly not helpful to put that together. In my opinion, this is my most important finance letter of my 6 years at the finance committee. You know, the first 5 years was everything was hunky dory. You know, cash came out of our ears. You know, everything was able to be funded. It was well run, and then you know, and then we set a couple of critical highlights. You know, schooling and all that stuff. But this is now very different, and so timing is not on our side at this point. So, and you will see how I worded the investment. Yes, I started basically business as usual. Yes, I comment on what's in the plan, but then there are, you know, I added to it that we expect that in town meeting, there will be a detailed discussion where we stand with our finances before we will be able to approve that budget. So I think that is important to put that in our letter, that between the time we write it and actually town meeting, and we can be sure this is not happening on May 19th. This is way too early. So it will be pushed out to June, maybe even July or later. Between then and what's then the situation at that, I mean, so many things can change. And I don't want to sit in that town meeting where everybody looks at that letter and said, what kind of bunch of, you know, I don't want to say, put that letter together, because we will be wrong one way or the other at that town meeting.
Yep.
So we got to be very flexible what we word and said, okay, yeah, this is based on what we have at that point, but we know it's not, I would not approve in that letter at that point at all. I would not put that in the warrant. I would be at least undecided, you know, maybe not disapprove, but also not approve. What's the middle way? You can.
No, so you take no action. So I think we should have a conversation around that, because that's going to help us, right? So we're not, this, just to be clear, this is not a formal vote. We are not, you know, deliberate, you know, I don't want this, the public hearing happens on April 8th and then our vote. But I think we can be, we have options. So we have two options, in my opinion, one that I favor and one I think is probably less favorable. One is that we take no action, right? So that's not favorable or unfavorable, and it will say no action in the warrant book, and that allows us to vote formally at, we'll just probably have to, you know, come earlier, right, to the meeting before town meeting, and or have a meeting before that, depending on how far town meeting gets pushed out. And we will, if it gets pushed out, and we will vote at that point with the best available information we have right before town meeting, right? That's option one. Option two is we can vote favorable or unfavorable action on the budget we have currently, and then, you know, have significant caveats throughout our warrant letter. My preference is to go with option one. I think it gives us the most flexibility, but I'd also like to hear from, you know, you all regarding your feedback.
In regards to my conversation with Mark, and again, I mean, that is really exactly what I'm talking about. Just this is that we don't want to put something out there that is radically different than what happens in town meeting. We have to, and I think option number one is prudent, because then we aren't doing a definitive approval or disapproval of anything. We are leaving ourselves the opportunity to have time to reevaluate based on our rapidly changing financial environment, which we know will happen. And I think that Tom is right. I would be shocked if we actually had town meeting that early. It would only be because legally we were bound to do so in some way. It's very hard to imagine that that's going to happen. So I think you're right. I'm agreeing with the both of you. And that really has been my point from the get-go, is like, I don't want to put something down on paper in front of people that is radically different than what we present in town meeting. I'm not willing to do that.
I agree. And I've got to say that from where I sit, I have a hard time, and perhaps it's just the particular area that I've been asked to focus on. I have a hard time getting my head around how I could even write anything about the Stevens estate right now. I mean, put aside all of the things that have been happening with it and the long-term planning committee that hasn't come to any sort of conclusion that basically has paused all of its work in light of what's happening with COVID. Like, I assume, but I haven't gotten a full update. And I didn't want to interrupt tonight to do that because I think it's a separate conversation. But I assume most of the events have been canceled, but for how long, I don't know. And what this does for future bookings, who knows? Like, how can we even today, next week, and the 2 weeks from now have any idea what to say about that other than I don't know? And I guess I feel like that in particular about the issue I've been asked to focus on, but I also feel like that I just agree wholeheartedly with, I guess, with what Thomas has said. It's so hard sitting here for me. I just keep thinking over 3 million people filed for unemployment in 1 week, and the town is telling me that this is not going to impact our budget. I just have a hard time thinking, like, understanding all of the information I know about what's happening in the market and what is happening in the greater economy and marrying that up with a very rosy budget. Like, I just think we need to see more time to play out before we can have any opinion on whether this budget is valid.
So fair, and I guess I'd like to pivot off that a bit, although I'm somewhat changing subjects, is that, you know, I think we need to also have kind of a go forward plan regarding the conversation we had tonight. So, you know, let everyone kind of sit with the conversation and discussion we had, and then, you know, have some go forward plan as a committee on what our analysis will be on how we're going to, you know, figure out that question, Jen, right? So there's a lot of unknowns, but then there's a lot of things that we can do you know, as a committee to kind of dig into some of our questions about our budget and you know, reach out for more answers. And I think we need to think through that a bit independently, and we can come back, you know, because we're also going to want to provide, you know, do that analysis and then provide some of that information publicly as a committee so that people know where our heads are at in terms of how we're making decisions. Does that sound, you know, fair? So one of my things is, for example, we have a 90% collection rate. So what did we budget versus, you know, that 90%? And, you know, we typically budget conservatively. So what does that really look like? You know, what, and then kind of from a sensitivity analysis standpoint, how impactful would, you know, a 5% or an 85% collection rate or an 80% or all those things, how would that look? I'm not saying we have to do all of that, but I think it would be helpful to think about ways in which we can frame this and understand the impacts. Does that make sense?
It does to
You're
me.
gonna write all that for us, Sasha?
What?
You're gonna write all that for us?
No, that's not part of writing. It's just, I think, you know, if this continues, it's not something we're going to do in the next week, right? So our
Right.
main focus, main objective at this point, I think we've kind of, you know, not everyone has spoken, but they have not spoken against our conversation regarding maybe taking, you know, thinking about taking no action next week.
Yeah.
However, right, we need to continue forward with our letter. And I think we're all in the position that we want to discuss the facts as they currently stand, the budget as it currently stands, and then provide additional clarity or lack of clarity, right? You know, say that pretty clearly in the letter. And we can, I think if each person creates their section, we can put it, you know, sends it to me. And I think, Chris, I might have you and anyone else who wants to be on the warrant letter editing committee that we've continued to kind of do every year. We'll put that all together, and then we'll have something for everyone to just read somewhat. It's not going to be final before Wednesday. And then Wednesday during that meeting, it'll give us the opportunity to just kind of craft, you know, what are our bullet points in the executive summary for this particular, you know, conversation? What does that look like? And do we all feel comfortable with generally how it reads and the perspective that we're taking?
That's a fair approach. We just have to do our work for, like you say, this weekend, and get something in front of you so that we can move forward. But yes, that sounds like a plan. Basic budget with the assumptions that we have right now. A paragraph or two is saying like this probably won't. This might not come to fruition. These are maybe some of our plans about that, and you know, basically that's sort of an outline, sort of a 1, 2, 3 on every single item. Is that kind of how you're looking at it?
Yeah, and we might get more information the next day, right? We're not sure. So, but as of today, I think that's how we need to move forward in order to kind of meet our deadline, unless that deadline changes, which I don't anticipate it will before April 10th. And then from there, we also have the opportunity, if town meeting is delayed or things are changed, we can write something additional that, would be reflective of how we may actually vote at town meeting if it's many months away. We also have to keep that in the back of our minds. Does that sound, please someone, interject if it's hard because we're not in person. I can't gauge everyone. So if you feel comfortable with that, if that seems like a right approach, or if you have feedback.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good, and I would also maybe add to, and I always said this with the OPEB, we can say things that the town manager or selectman has a little bit more hard time to say, or don't want to say. We can point things out, and maybe there are a couple of things that are a bit scary. But I would say the town meeting is expecting us to really point that out, and based on facts, obviously, because town meeting is smart. Those 6 town meetings, I was always impressed how smart at the end of the day the town meeting is with all the decisions a town meeting makes. And I think they want to hear also the scary stuff, and so. And we are the entity basically within the town management that can actually has the luxury to say a little bit more than the other guys.
Well, I think, one of our comments tonight, public comments was specifically like, how are you going to have this conversation with the public if necessary? So I'd ask that everyone keep that in the back of their minds too. As the situation evolves, if there's things that we feel like we need to continue to discuss, we may have more meetings. Right now, April 8th is our last meeting before the scheduled the meeting directly before town meeting. Please anticipate that schedule may change and evolve, and please be prepared for that. I obviously will try to be as judicious as possible in terms of people's time, but this is, I think, like Thomas said, a pretty significant subject, and it's not uncommon for us to add meetings if we need to. Any additional questions, comments, old business, anything? Okay. Well, that is all I have. Thank you, everyone, for joining the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
That was Ed, just for the record.
I'll second.
That was Chris Allen, for the record, that seconded the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Sasha.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.